Marcus Thornton's hands were trembling as he knelt in the rain-soaked parking lot of the grocery store, his knees pressing into the cold, wet asphalt as he stared at the eviction notice he'd just pulled from his jacket pocket. The paper was already dampening from the relentless drizzle, the ink beginning to blur, but the words were clear enough. 14 days. That's all he had left before he and his 7-year-old daughter Emma would be out on the street. The fluorescent lights from the store behind him cast long, harsh shadows across the pavement, and for a moment, Marcus felt the weight of every single failure, every missed opportunity, every wrong turn he'd taken since his wife Sarah had died 3 years ago pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. He was 34 years old, a former architectural engineer who'd once designed buildings that touched the sky, and now he couldn't even keep a roof over his daughter's head. The irony wasn't lost on him, and it tasted bitter on his tongue as he folded the notice and shoved it back into his pocket, forcing himself to stand up and wipe the rain from his face, knowing that Emma was waiting for him at their apartment with Mrs. Chen from next door, probably doing her homework at the kitchen table that wobbled because one of the legs was shorter than the others, completely unaware that her father was drowning in a sea of desperation with no shore in sight. He took a deep breath and started walking toward his car, an old sedan that had seen better days, its paint faded and its engine making concerning noises that he didn't have the money to investigate. The parking lot was nearly empty at this hour, just past 8 in the evening on a Tuesday, and the rain was coming down harder now, turning the world into a watercolor painting where everything bled together in shades of gray and shadow. That's when he heard it. A sound so small and fragile that he almost missed it beneath the steady drumming of rain on metal and concrete. A sob, high-pitched and terrified. Marcus stopped in his tracks, his hand already on his car door handle, and turned toward the sound. There, huddled between two parked cars about 20 feet away, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, her pink jacket soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her face, and her entire body shaking with cold and fear as she cried into her hands. Every instinct Marcus had as a father kicked into gear immediately. He forgot about the eviction notice, forgot about his empty bank account, forgot about everything except the fact that there was a child out here in the rain, alone and terrified. He approached slowly, not wanting to scare her more than she already was, and crouched down a few feet away from her, keeping his voice gentle and calm. She looked up at him with wide, brown eyes that were swimming with tears, and something in Marcus's chest cracked wide open because those eyes reminded him so much of Emma's eyes whenever she was scared or hurt. The little girl didn't run away, but she didn't move toward him either, just watched him with that heartbreaking mixture of hope and caution that children learn too early when the world proves itself unsafe. Marcus asked her what her name was, where her mother was, but the child just kept crying, her words coming out in broken, hiccuping gasps that he could barely understand. Something about shopping, about turning around and mommy was gone, about being scared and not knowing what to do. Marcus felt his heart break for this child, this stranger's daughter who was living through every parent's nightmare and every child's worst fear. He pulled out his phone to call the police, but the little girl's crying intensified, and she shook her head frantically. Saying something about her mommy telling her never to talk to police, which sent up red flags in Marcus's mind but also made him more determined to help. He stayed there in the rain with her, talking softly, telling her about his own daughter Emma, about how she was probably doing her math homework right now and hating every minute of it, trying to make the little girl smile even just a little bit. Slowly, painfully slowly, she began to calm down enough to tell him that her name was Sophia Martinez, that she was 5 3/4 years old, that her mommy's name was Isabella, and that they had been shopping for groceries when Sophia had wandered away to look at the toys, and when she came back, her mother was gone. If you believe in the power of kindness, if you believe that one small act can change everything, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel. We share stories that remind us of the good that still exists in this world, the connections that bind us together, and the hope that carries us through our darkest moments. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and let's build a community of people who still believe in second chances, in redemption, and in the idea that we're all in this together. Now, let's continue with Marcus and Sophia's story. Marcus knew he couldn't leave this child alone, not for a second, not in this parking lot, not in this rain, not in this world that could be so cruel to the vulnerable. He made the decision right there, kneeling in the rain with water running down his back and his jeans soaked through, that he would help this little girl find her mother no matter what it took, no matter how long it took, even though he had 1,000 problems of his own waiting for him at home. He asked Sophia if she knew what her mother's car looked like, if she remembered where they had parked, if there was anything that might help them find her. The little girl thought hard, her face scrunching up with concentration, and finally said that her mommy's car was white and had a sticker of a butterfly on the back window. It wasn't much, but it was something, and Marcus took her small, cold hand in his and together they started walking through the parking lot, searching for a white car with a butterfly sticker, while Marcus kept trying to call the store's customer service desk from his phone to see if anyone had reported a lost child. The store manager, a harried-looking woman named Patricia, came rushing out when Marcus finally got through, and she brought them inside where it was warm and dry, wrapping Sophia in a blanket from the back office and giving her a hot chocolate from the break room. Patricia made announcements over the store's PA system, her voice echoing through the aisles asking for Isabella Martinez to come to the customer service desk, and they waited, Marcus sitting on the floor next to Sophia because she wouldn't let go of his hand, her tiny fingers wrapped around his like he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become unstable and frightening. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour, and there was no sign of Sophia's mother. Marcus's phone kept buzzing in his pocket with texts from Mrs. Chen asking when he'd be home, telling him that Emma was getting worried, but he couldn't leave, not yet, not until he knew this child was safe. Patricia suggested calling the police, and this time Marcus agreed, despite Sophia's protests, because an hour was too long, something was wrong, and this little girl needed more help than he could give her alone. The officers who arrived were kind and professional, a male officer named David Reeves and a female officer named Sarah Kim, and they took down all the information, asked Sophia gentle questions, and began making calls to hospitals and checking missing persons reports. Marcus gave them his information, explained how he'd found Sophia, and offered to stay until her mother was found, even though Officer Reeves told him he could go home, that they would take care of everything from here. But Marcus looked down at Sophia, who was still holding his hand, who had stopped crying but was now just silent and numb with exhaustion and fear, and he knew he couldn't leave her. He texted Mrs. Chen and asked if she could stay with Emma a little longer, promised to pay her extra even though he had no idea where that money would come from, and settled in to wait. 2 hours turned into 3, and the store was closing, the lights beginning to dim, the employees going home one by one until it was just Marcus, Sophia, the 2 police officers, and Patricia who had stayed late out of concern for the child. Officer Kim had made countless calls, had checked every database, had even driven around the surrounding area looking for the white car with the butterfly sticker, but there was nothing, no sign of Isabella Martinez, no missing persons report, no abandoned vehicle, nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Marcus could see the concern growing on the officers' faces, could see the way they were starting to exchange glances that suggested they were thinking about child services, about what happens to a child when no parent can be found, and his heart broke all over again for this little girl who had already been through so much tonight. Then Officer Reeves's radio crackled to life, and a voice came through, urgent and strained, reporting a single vehicle accident about 2 miles from the grocery store, a white sedan that had skidded off the road in the rain and crashed into a utility pole, driver unconscious and being transported to Mercy General Hospital, and on the back window of the vehicle there was a butterfly sticker. Marcus felt his stomach drop, felt Sophia's hand tighten around his, and he looked at Officer Kim who was already grabbing her keys and radio, already coordinating with the hospital, already trying to confirm the identity of the driver. The next 30 minutes were a blur of phone calls and hurried conversations and Marcus trying to explain to Sophia in the gentlest way possible that her mommy might have been in an accident, that she might be hurt, that they needed to go to the hospital to check on her. Sophia's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was something different in them, not just fear but a terrible, dawning understanding that the world could be cruel and random and that the people you love could be taken from you in an instant. Officer Kim drove them to the hospital, and Marcus sat in the back seat with Sophia, who had crawled into his lap and buried her face in his chest, her small body trembling with silent sobs. He held her the way he held Emma when she had nightmares, with one arm wrapped around her shoulders and his other hand gently stroking her hair, whispering that everything would be okay even though he had no idea if that was true, even though he knew better than most people that sometimes everything was not okay, that sometimes the people you loved died and left you alone to figure out how to keep breathing in a world that suddenly made no sense. The hospital was bright and sterile and smelled like disinfectant and fear, and Officer Kim spoke to the emergency room staff while Marcus waited with Sophia in the hallway, still holding her, still trying to be strong for this child who wasn't his but who needed him anyway. A doctor came out, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes and gray streaking through her dark hair, and she knelt down in front of Sophia and explained in simple, honest words that her mommy had been in a car accident, that she had hit her head and was sleeping right now, that the doctors were taking very good care of her and that she was going to be okay, but that she needed to rest and heal. Sophia asked if she could see her mommy, and the doctor hesitated, looking at Officer Kim, looking at Marcus, and finally nodded, saying just for a minute, just to see that she was okay. They walked down the long, fluorescent-lit hallway, past rooms full of pain and suffering and the daily miracles that happen in hospitals, until they reached a room where a woman lay in a bed, her head bandaged, her face bruised, but breathing steadily, alive. Sophia whispered, "Mommy," in a voice so small and broken that Marcus had to look away to keep his own tears from falling, and he lifted her up so she could see her mother better, so she could reach out and touch her hand, so she could know that her mother was still there, still breathing, still fighting to come back to her. Isabella Martinez didn't wake up, but her fingers twitched slightly when Sophia touched them, and the monitors showed steady vital signs, and the doctor assured them that she was stable, that the head injury was serious but not life-threatening, that she would likely wake up within the next day or two. The problem, Officer Kim explained quietly to Marcus while Sophia was distracted looking at her mother, was what to do with Sophia in the meantime. Isabella had no identification on her, no wallet, no phone, nothing that could help them contact family members or emergency contacts. The car had been registered to an address that turned out to be a motel on the outskirts of town, a weekly rental place that Isabella had paid for in cash and where she and Sophia had apparently been living for the past month. There was no father in the picture, no emergency contact listed on any forms, no family members that they could track down, and Child Protective Services would have to be called, would have to take Sophia into temporary custody until Isabella woke up and they could sort everything out. Marcus felt something fierce and protective rise up in his chest, something that surprised him with its intensity. He looked at this little girl who had been through so much in one night, who had been lost and found and then faced with her mother's hospitalization, and he couldn't bear the thought of her being taken away by strangers, put into a system that was overworked and understaffed, spending the night in some unfamiliar place without anyone who knew her story, without anyone who had sat with her in the rain and held her hand and promised her that everything would be okay. He pulled Officer Kim aside and asked if there was any way, any possible way, that Sophia could stay with him, just for the night, just until Isabella woke up and they could figure out what came next. Officer Kim looked at him like he was crazy, explained all the regulations and procedures and reasons why that couldn't happen, but Marcus persisted, his voice low and urgent, telling her that he was a father, that he had a daughter the same age, that he had a clean record and a home and that he would take full responsibility, that he just couldn't stand the thought of this child spending the night scared and alone with strangers when there was another option. Something in his desperation must have reached Officer Kim, or maybe she was just tired of seeing children get lost in a system that was supposed to protect them, because she made a phone call to her supervisor, and then another phone call to someone at Child Services, and then she spent 20 minutes filling out paperwork and making Marcus sign forms and releases and temporary emergency custody agreements that made his head spin but that he signed anyway without reading the fine print because all that mattered was that Sophia wouldn't have to spend the night alone and scared. Officer Reeves looked skeptical but didn't object, and the hospital social worker who had been called in looked relieved to have one less crisis to deal with on an already overwhelming night. Sophia was told that she would be going home with Marcus, that she would get to meet his daughter Emma, that she would have a warm bed and breakfast in the morning and that they would come back to see her mommy as soon as visiting hours started, and for the first time that night, Marcus saw something like relief cross the little girl's face. The drive back to Marcus's apartment was quiet, Sophia falling asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the evening, and Marcus's mind racing with thoughts of how he was going to explain all of this to Emma, how he was going to manage with 2 children when he could barely manage with 1, how he was going to make any of this work when his life was already falling apart at the seams. But when he pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex and saw Mrs. Chen waiting by the door, her face creased with worry, when he carried the sleeping Sophia inside and saw Emma's eyes go wide with curiosity and concern, when he tucked both girls into Emma's bed because Sophia refused to let go of his hand and Emma immediately offered to share, he felt something shift inside him, something that had been frozen and broken since Sarah died beginning to thaw and knit itself back together. The next morning came too early, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of the apartment that Marcus had been about to lose, and he woke to find both girls already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, Emma showing Sophia her collection of drawings and Sophia actually smiling, actually laughing at something Emma had said. Marcus made them pancakes with the last of the pancake mix in the cupboard and the eggs that were about to expire, and they ate together, the three of them crowded around the wobbly table, and for a moment it felt like family, like something whole and right and good. Emma asked questions about Sophia's mom, and Marcus answered them honestly but gently, explaining about the accident in the hospital and how sometimes bad things happen to good people but that didn't mean we stop hoping or caring or helping. Emma, wise beyond her 7 years in the way that children who have lost a parent often are, simply nodded and then asked Sophia if she wanted to see her toy collection, and the two girls disappeared into Emma's room, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his coffee and the crushing weight of responsibility. He called the hospital and was told that Isabella was still unconscious but stable, that they were monitoring her closely and would call if there was any change. He called Officer Kim to update her, and she told him that they were still trying to track down any family members or friends who might be able to take Sophia, but so far they had come up empty. The motel where Isabella and Sophia had been staying had yielded no useful information, just a room with a few clothes and some toys and a sense of transience that broke Marcus's heart all over again. These were people running from something or towards something, people living on the margins, people who had fallen through the cracks of a society that was supposed to catch them. Marcus knew that feeling intimately, knew what it was like to be one bad day away from homelessness, one missed paycheck away from disaster, and he felt a kinship with Isabella Martinez even though he'd never met her, even though all he knew of her was her unconscious form in a hospital bed and her daughter's tear-stained face. The day passed in a strange mixture of normalcy and surrealism, Marcus taking the girls to the park even though it was cold and the playground equipment was still wet from last night's rain, watching them run and play and be children despite everything that had happened, despite everything that was still uncertain. He bought them lunch with money he didn't really have, happy meals from the drive-thru because Sophia's eyes had lit up when Emma mentioned the toys, and he sat in the parking lot watching them eat and trade toys and talk about nothing and everything the way children do. His phone buzzed with a call from his landlord, a reminder about the eviction notice, a demand to know when Marcus would have the back rent he owed, and Marcus let it go to voicemail because he couldn't deal with that right now, couldn't face his own problems when he was trying to hold together the fragile piece of this temporary family.